All right, Higgsy, it's a couple of minutes past, and I can see we've got a few people who've jumped on, so I think we should have you take it away.
No worries. Thank you very much, Kayla. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. As Kayla mentioned, my name is Andrew Higgs, and I'm one of the solution architects for MAQ Digital, focusing on Microsoft collaboration and unified communications. Today we're going to be talking about the process of upgrading from Skype for Business to Teams and what an upgrade actually means, and some of the learnings and processes that you need to start considering when going through this process. If I can get a show of hands of anyone who's still on Skype for Business. I can't actually see you guys. This is a live stream. I'm only kidding around. So let's just crack into it and get started. All right, so Teams. Everyone's, I'm sure most people are aware of what Teams is now, and it's especially during COVID. It's really forged its way ahead and as a market-leading solution for collaboration and unified communications. Microsoft Teams is branded as the hub for teamwork, ultimately providing organizations and schools and so forth the ability to collaborate on documents and with each other in real time. And with it, it brings third-party application integration with it as well, and is highly embedded in the Power Platform as well. So you might have a Skype for Business environment today that you've seen Microsoft Teams on the horizon, and you want to look at the process of migrating from Skype for Business to Teams. Hopefully today you'll be learning a lot more around the process of that, and you get a more rounded view of what Microsoft Teams is. So Microsoft Teams isn't just rebranded Skype for Business. A lot of people see Teams as the upgrade from Skype for Business or Link back in the day, but Microsoft Teams is a lot more than that. I tend to think of Microsoft Teams as the new desktop application that's a little bit similar to the way you treat Outlook. Outlook, ultimately, you're using it for your mail, your contacts, your calendar, and so forth. You're going to be using Teams for nearly everything else. Teams has the ability to, it brings forward those features from Skype for Business, such as chat and meetings, and even telephony as well. But ultimately, what it does is it introduces new business processes as well for the way that you collaborate on files. Leveraging SharePoint on the back end and Office 365 groups, you have the capability of working on documents in real time. Not to mention, you also have the ability to bring in some of your existing business apps so that you bring in content from other applications into Teams as well. Teams is designed to have a central place for productivity. As I mentioned before, that hub for teamwork. It's that one place that you go to for you to be able to access information in other areas across the business, but in a central place. So, for example, you might have, Dynamics or Dynamics CRM or Salesforce, and instead of having to go off to those other applications that you might be working on a project, for example, you can start bringing that information back into the Teams interface. So you don't have to leave the application, and you don't have to go looking for that information elsewhere. So at a high level, that's ultimately what Teams is all about. So why do we want to upgrade to Teams? Why do you want to get off Skype for Business? A lot of it is self-explanatory once you look at what the capabilities are with Teams. But let's look at the advanced features and the capabilities, especially around that richer meeting experience. The modern user experience gives you that capability of having the mobile client and the desktop client and even the meeting rooms with that uniform experience, having the ability to start a chat message on your mobile phone and then continue that conversation in real time from the desktop when you get back to your desk, and vice versa. The ability to leverage channel-based communication. So you might have a project that have multiple parts to that project, and you can collaborate on just those components and having chat, a persistent chat in that group. It allows you to work across businesses. So one thing that Skype for Business was great at was that peer-to-peer chat and having those scheduled meetings. that gets brought forward with teams, and so you're no longer just working within your organizational unit. So you might have a finance department that is working amongst themselves. Microsoft Teams allows you to work across the business, so you've got multiple pockets of teams that can collaborate in one space. So it's ultimately redefining the way that you actually do business and do actually work as an organization. So the great thing about Teams is that it has got a significant amount of production from the Microsoft backend. So they've tagged it as the fastest growing business app in Microsoft history. And the most recent stats are showing that they've got over 258 million Office 365 seats licensed for Microsoft Teams. You know, as of April, they saw 75 million active users, which was 70% growth from March 2020. You know, the actual uptake of Teams has been massive, obviously during the coronavirus pandemic, but with more organizations now using it, they're quickly realizing the capabilities that the application brings above and beyond previous products that they've used. And since February 2020, from the source Eternity, they've highlighted that Microsoft Teams is now it's got the fastest growth of all collaboration products at 894% growth since February. Absolutely amazing stuff. So today we're going to be talking about obviously getting you from Skype Business to Teams. And in our MOQ digital process, we're really talking about the adoption and readiness and the extending or onboarding and extending of Teams for the Skype for Business platform. That is, you know, to get you from Skype for Business to Teams. So we have a proven process that we follow that ultimately focuses on the journey from Skype Business to Teams and the key components around that. So when we're charting your journey, we're really ultimately making sure that we've got the right people on board for the project. So when you're starting to look at the planning phases of your project, you're ultimately wanting to plan for success, making sure that you've got the right project stakeholders involved and having them actually across what the journey is, understanding what the goal is, understanding that you have a defined scope that you're trying to meet, and having their buy-in and understanding the journey is critical. So making sure you've got the right people in the right seats for the journey is critical. Defining that project definition, so going through and actually mapping out how you're going to get there, and this is something where a partner can definitely help, such as MOQ, making sure that we can bring forward our proven process to help meet the project timeframes and ultimately get you over the line. Assessing the network and making sure that you've got technical readiness, and then going through and making sure that you've got user acceptance as well. So technical readiness and user readiness is typically one of those things that gets organizations stuck. So technical readiness, going through and actually assessing the network, making sure that you've got the right bandwidth available to you. Microsoft Teams is a cloud service. You might be an organization that has ExpressRoute or has another mechanism of getting to the internet, getting to Microsoft's cloud quicker, and you need to make sure that through a network readiness assessment that your network is up to scratch to perform and meet the expectations of obviously multiple people leveraging Teams for conferencing and peer-to-peer chat and so forth. And then the user acceptance as well. So one of the things that we encourage organizations to do as part of their comms plan is to make sure that they're armed with the right emails and brochureware to get the message out there, making sure that the users are ready to be using Teams and that the appropriate training is in place, that you've got posters around the workplace to say, yeah, change is coming. Skype for Business is going away, and Microsoft Teams is going to be coming in. One of the things I'll show you later on is some of that messaging that we can actually do within the client. So notifying those Skype for Business users that change is coming and encouraging them to go from switching from the Skype for Business client into Teams, giving them the ability to either migrate themselves from an application usage point of view and getting familiar with change that is coming. Deployment and implementation. So the coexistence strategy is critical here, and I'll be talking about why coexistence is important in a second. But to implement a pilot of Teams is crucial for any Teams project. You know, a lot of organizations have, you know, obviously due to COVID, have just gone through and just turned Teams on and not gone through and selected a pilot group of users to make sure that Teams is fit for purpose first, and then bring it into production to roll out to the rest of the business. Now, not to say that that's the wrong approach. It has its own challenges, but obviously we've been working with a lot of customers that, you know, have gone down the path of piloting it and making sure it's fit for purpose. You might say, look, you know, we want to pilot Teams as just for instant messaging and meetings payloads, or you might go, look, you know, we don't want to go down the meetings and calling path just yet. We want to focus on just the file collaboration components. So how would we migrate our SharePoint on-prem environment to SharePoint online and start leveraging those files through the Teams interface? So going through and defining, say, you know, a project that for your organization that you might find is the Kickstarter to using Teams. Using that project and that project group as the pilot users for Teams. You know, IT are obviously, you know, they're great for piloting Teams, but they don't ultimately give you all of the feedback that you may want from end users. Leveraging a project group, or even those particular users that, you know, the noisy ones. There's always noisy users in every organization. Picking them and getting their feedback for leveraging Teams for their projects would be a good choice. And then the final piece is driving the value through optimization and growth. The great thing about Teams is that you have the capabilities to report on adoption. So understanding as an IT manager or a CIO, understanding, you know, how my staff actually using the product. Are they using it for meetings? Are they using it for chat? Are they actually, you know, leveraging it every single day? What is the rate of adoption across the business? You know, if we're bringing on Teams at a per business unit migration, you know, is the rate of adoption consistent with what we had, what you're planning for? So the appropriate adoption reporting, as well as obviously managing the life cycle of Teams as well. So the way you look at Teams is, yes, it's an application, and whilst the product is rapidly developing, you might say that, you know, Teams, we're going to be doing a Skype for Business to Teams migration. That's one project, but there's going to be a whole bunch of other projects post that migration. The actual Teams lifecycle doesn't really end. Whilst the projects end, the lifecycle doesn't, because the project is constantly growing. So it's about managing the release cycles of products within Teams that help continue that journey of Microsoft Teams. So the Teams upgrade path. I mentioned the coexistence mode, and whilst that's important, you know, Teams ultimately, you know, out of the box, if you've got Skype for Business on-prem or Skype for Business online, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, we're using both at the moment. We can use both Skype and both Teams. So that would mean that you are in Islands mode. Now, Islands mode allows you to run both clients simultaneously, and if you're using it for telephony can be delivered to one of those applications, you know, whether it be Skype for Business or Teams. Part of your migration planning is to define which mode you want to get to. So you might say that, you know, this is going to be a 6 month journey. So we really want people we want to control the adoption of Teams. We want to make sure that, you know, the rest of the business is on Skype Business only, and they become Teams only once we've migrated that business unit. Or you might say, look, you know, we're going to be going from Skype for Business, and we're going to be introducing just the meetings and collaboration payloads. So you might select the coexistence mode for those users to be Skype for Business with Teams collaboration and meetings. The end state that you want to get to is the Teams only coexistence mode. And there's two ways that we can do this. There's an organization-wide setting, which is effectively the big bang approach, and you just cut everyone over to Teams. Highly unrecommended there. I do not recommend doing that. It is a significant amount of change and basically cuts off Skype for Business completely. Regardless of if you're on Skype for Business Online or Skype for Business On-Prem, the next time that someone opens up their Skype for Business client and they're on Teams only mode, it's going to say, you're now on Skype, you're on Microsoft Teams now. Click here to change over to Microsoft Teams. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But again, part of the migration planning and the journey is to define how do you get from islands mode, or how do you get from Skype for Business only and get to Teams only mode. Teams only mode allows you to have full functionality within Teams, including voice. So islands mode. So I mentioned before that islands mode is where you can have both Skype for Business and Microsoft Teams running simultaneously. You can see here on the left-hand side that the Teams client has all the functionality with chat and meetings and calling, and the Skype for Business also has the same capabilities as well. Within Outlook, you have the ability to book not only Teams meetings, but also Skype for Business meetings as well. So your peer-to-peer chat will operate if your chat is initiated from Skype for Business. Your chat with your colleagues will also be in Skype for Business. If you initiate chat from Teams, it's going to appear in the corresponding colleagues Teams client as well. So Teams within chat, Teams chat is all contained within Teams. Skype for Business chat contained within Skype for Business. Telephony-wise, telephony can be delivered to ultimately Skype for Business in islands mode, with the idea of it being converted to Teams only mode. Then your telephony will be able to leverage through Teams. Teams only mode. Again, this is the end state that you want to get to. You know, your chat and your calling, your meetings, everything is within the Teams client. Now, when you migrate a Skype for Business user to Teams, all driven through PowerShell, all data gets migrated. So that includes your existing contacts, your existing meetings. They all dynamically migrate from Skype for Business On-Prem or Skype for Business Online, and they will appear within the Teams client, including converting your Skype for Business meetings into Teams meetings. And they automatically get rescheduled, and the new footer of the email gets republished with the Teams invitation as well. So how does it look like when you've got someone who's on Teams only mode and someone who's on Skype for Business mode? Here I've got a bit of a preview of what it looks like when someone in Teams is chatting with someone on Skype for Business. And you'll notice that there's some key messages that were key flags that appear in both clients. So here we have Adele, who's using Teams, and she's talking with Alan. Now, Alan's using Skype for Business. You'll notice that in Adele's Teams client, it's actually said at the top here, this person is currently using Skype for Business. Some Microsoft Teams features won't be available. And there's even a little flag in the chat on the side there under the recent contacts as to what they're using. And then you'll see the little Skype for Business logo there as well. On the flip side, in Alan's client, you'll find that there's a little yellow banner at the bottom. Adele is not using Skype for Business. For a richer experience, switch to Teams or start a Skype meeting. Now, ultimately, what we're trying to do here is encourage people that are still using Skype for Business to put up their hand and say, hey, I would like to come across the Teams. One of the things that's traditionally worked in the past is using what we call the pull methods to Teams. You know, ultimately, getting those conversations across the business of people going, oh, I've heard that you've been using Microsoft Teams, or I heard this department use Microsoft Teams. We would like to use Microsoft Teams. We're currently on Skype for Business. Can we be part of the next pilot group? Or even, ultimately, put their hand up and say, can you please move us as soon as possible? Because we've got the Teams client on our desktop, but we can't use it because it says that we have to use Skype for Business. So ultimately, getting the people to request and ask for Teams is going to help with your adoption process. No one really likes having a new application forced down them. Now, admittedly, the coronavirus pandemic has put a lot of organizations in that situation where it's forced change. You're now working from home, and the existing collaboration applications aren't fit for purpose, and so you may have gone ahead and just deployed Teams across the business. This is an opportunity now for you to revisit Teams and go, okay, have we gone through and actually made it secure? Is it compliant? Are we actually using those Office 365 security and compliance features to our advantage? Are our meeting policies and all of our messaging and Teams policies exactly what we want? Have we got a defined process around creating Teams? So whilst you may have got Teams on the desktop today, it's about going back and looking at how we made sure that the application is secure and built to proper standards. Skype for Business might still be hanging around. This is an opportunity to go back and look back at Skype for Business and get the remaining of the services moved across, and then start decommissioning it. So there are other considerations around migrating from Skype for Business as well, is the meeting rooms. So if you're an organization that you may or may not know, if you've got group series endpoints, so Polycom group series, as well as, you might have some of the old Trio and Collaboration Plus devices, those devices won't be able to register with Microsoft Teams. So in order to retain those assets, you might consider using a video interoperability service, or if funding is available, look at replacing those assets with Microsoft Teams registered endpoints. Poly recently announced their new Microsoft Teams Room solutions, which are effectively, as you can see in the middle of the screen here, a little Lenovo device with the appropriate camera solutions attached. So you might be looking at having a small huddle space where the Poly Studio camera might be fit for purpose, as well as a larger meeting space that might require speaker tracking, all delivered through a little touchscreen on the table here, and an enterprise grade. This is the new Poly C60 conferencing phone, which gives you a much more richer experience. Those organizations that might have a Trio 8800, well, this is the Trio C60, which is it's now superseded it. And has a fantastic 6-meter microphone pickup range. Highly recommend looking at one of these. Absolutely fantastic. There's also collaboration bars as well released from Poly that give you that speaker tracking and wireless presentation, all contained within the one little device there. And also the complementary devices for the end users as well. You might have a Skype for Business telephony environment, and you're looking to migrate from Skype for Business to Teams for telephony, making sure that all of your users, especially if they're working remotely, making sure that they've got the right qualified Microsoft Teams devices on their heads. So, I'm using this one under the UC headsets here. This is a Focus UC. And it's an absolutely fantastic microphone with active noise cancelling and so forth. These are fantastic devices, especially when working from home, because they block out that background noise, and it allows me to focus on the meetings that I'm participating in. Sorry, one more thing was the video interoperability. I mentioned previously that you might have an existing fleet of Poly group series devices, or even if you're migrating from another video conferencing platform, whether it be Cisco or Lifesize or whichever, and you're migrating to Teams, you don't necessarily have to replace all of those assets with Microsoft Teams devices immediately. If you've still got warranty and there's still life within those assets, and you've got maintenance attached to them, then sweat those assets out and leverage what they call a video interoperability service. So Poly have a Real Connect service which allows you to join your Teams meetings from those Cisco devices or life science devices or any standard-based SIP device, so that you could simply have that same join experience. You're scheduling, you're going to Outlook, you're scheduling your Teams meeting, you're inviting that's called a Cisco video conferencing room, and you're walking into that room and pressing the join button on a Cisco device, which then joins your Microsoft Teams meeting that you scheduled. So it's all about making sure that whilst you're going through that journey of migrating from one service to another, making sure that end user experience is consistent. So when we're talking about extending teams, let's fast forward a little bit. So you've migrated, you've got your organization, you've gone through your planning, and you've defined your the scope of works to migrate you guys from Skype for Business to Teams. You go through and you complete the project, and you've successfully now migrated from Skype for Business, and you've now got all your users using Skype for Business, using Microsoft Teams now. The next step in the equation might be looking at how can we start extending Teams, starting to bring in some of our existing business applications into Teams. As I mentioned before, one of the great things about Teams is that you can bring in third-party applications into the Teams interface. So ultimately, what that will mean is that you will have the ability to bring in applications, like I mentioned before, with Sugar CRM or Salesforce, and even Evernote or GitHub, and getting those applications to participate as part of your Teams channels. So ultimately, there is an app store, as we'll call it, within Teams that you have access to thousands of applications that have already been pre-built for this purpose. There are more and more applications getting developed every single week, and so the app store is actually getting updated quite regularly. What about applications that aren't in the app store? Let's say that you've got a requirement to you've got a legacy SharePoint forms that you want to get away from. I use the example of leave forms or expense claims. Well, Microsoft's Power Platform has a play here. Ultimately, you can develop Power Apps and using Power Automate to start to create your own applications, which can be accessible through the Microsoft Teams interface. We, as an organization, developed a check-in application. So a check-in app. So we allowed for those who missed Piers Matthews' presentation a couple of weeks ago on Power Apps. He spoke about our check-in app, which gave staff the ability to notify with HR, how they were feeling that day and where they were working from, and was used as an early detection system to help us understand how our staff were coping with working from home, coronavirus, and etc. And it gave us that ability to keep tabs on our staff to make sure that they're not suffering ultimately. So this was a Power App that we had published and developed, and we were leveraging the Microsoft Teams interface to use that application. There was also the MOQ Digital Crisis Hub that we used to ultimately access this information for company announcements around the pandemic, and so we could have a central place to access that information all through the Teams interface as well. There is a bunch of other applications that are part of the Office 365 suite as well, such as Power BI and Planner and SharePoint, which can also tightly integrate into Teams as well. So if we were looking to enhance and integrate additional services, such as CRM and HR processes, Teams is a platform that allows you to consume this information, ultimately redefining traditional business processes and looking to leverage the Power Platform to create those new processes, automation, and make sure it gets delivered through Microsoft Teams. And one of the key ways that you can do that is using bots. So, for example, one of the biggest headaches you might have is around password resets, and so you could leverage a bot. So you could simply in the Teams client, do it at the top there, do a little / password reset, and a bot would pop up and say, hey, Andrew, I understand that you want to reset your password. Is that correct? And you go, yes. And you go, great. I've just texted you a 6-digit code, and you can enter in that 6-digit code, and then the bot will then prompt you to reset your password. So, making sure that you've got a secure model, as well as also giving the staff the flexibility around resetting that password, whilst also leveraging the Power Platform that's going off and logging a ticket with your service desk, and then closing that ticket so you've got a back-end process or back-end record of that password reset taking place as well. So the bots are exceptionally powerful as well. One of the other ones that we've been playing with is AtBot. So AtBot is a Q&A bot where you can ask it a simple question of, how do I grant permissions in Teams, or how do I schedule a meeting? How do I make a phone call? And the bot will come back and provide you an answer with that's predefined that you've compiled together, and then give you the right information or where to go to find information about that. So there is multiple types of bots. Power Virtual Agents and Q&A makers are very common bots to be built, but they're effectively they're low-code applications that allow you to ultimately get a faster and quicker response without having to put the burden on other business units such as the IT service desk as well. So if you're thinking about approval processes, and if someone completes a form and they complete it perfectly and doesn't require approval, then you can have a bot validate that and then check it off and then kickstart that approval process. Or you might have a leave form. You can have a bot pop up to the manager and say, hey, Sarah's taking leave. Here is her leave request. Would you like to approve it? And they just hit approve, and then away they go, without having a manager, on a 7 o'clock on a Friday night going through all their leave requests and going through and approving them all. Have a bot streamline that process and provide a pop-up for those managers. So one of the things I'll finish up with is our Microsoft Teams assessment. MOQ have a free 3-hour workshop that we have been working with a lot of our customers with, where someone like myself would come into your organization and meet with CIOs, IT managers, change management teams, and IT service desk staff to understand how Teams looks for your organization. And ultimately, out of this 3-hour workshop, the key things that you'd get from it is an understanding around your strategy and planning. So getting that, defining your organization's appetite for change, and understanding what the objective of Teams is going to bring to your business. We at MOQ are ProSci certified, which is Microsoft's preferred method for change management. And we've got a number of consultants who are certified to deliver change management programs following Microsoft's process for change management for M365 services. So that includes Microsoft Teams. As part of this Teams assessment, we would also get an understanding of where you are as an organization, understanding where you are today, what is your current adoption level, and how can we get you from point A to point B and even point C for future expansion. So going through and actually understanding if it's a SharePoint to Teams migration, then looking at your information architecture and understanding, okay, how do we get you from SharePoint on-prem, and do you really need to be migrating all that data to SharePoint online for consumption within Teams? What are you going to be using Teams for? Is it going to be department-based collaboration? Is it project-based collaboration across multiple business units? Or have you got those ad hoc teams that are going to be spun up on the side? What is your process around controlling the adoption of Teams by making sure that you've got naming conventions for your teams? Can we leverage Power Apps for that Teams creation process, and not having everyone with the ability to create a team, and then having IT happen to manage 17 teams called test team 1, test team 2. So understanding that adoption process. The operating, securing phases of your team's lifecycle. So looking at, is there a massive overhead on your IT department for managing your teams and that life cycle of teams? Would you require assistance from MAQ's managed services to help take that load off your IT department? Are you meeting all the security and compliance regulations for teams? Are you looking to deploy DLP, data loss prevention? And are you appropriately tagging all your metadata and making sure that files that are shared externally to outside of your organization, do they really need to be shared indefinitely? Are you doing auditing around what are you sharing externally? And onboarding and extending. So this is where the Skype for Business to Teams migration fits in. And as part of the Teams assessment, we will be walking through and going, okay, so you want to get from Skype for Business to Teams. These are the things that we need to do together to make sure that your Teams Skype for Business to Teams process migration is successful. Highlighting the importance around calling and meetings, so understanding the limitations of certain devices, and if you've got a contact center as well, what that means for when you migrate to Teams, and reviewing all your other existing processes within the business around expense claims and leave forms, and how you could potentially leverage the likes of Power Apps and Flow and Power Automate and so forth to streamline those processes. So again, the Microsoft Teams assessment, 3-hour workshop with someone like myself to help charter that journey for you and identify how you're going to go from point A and point B. That concludes the session today. I know we did finish a little bit earlier, but I wanted to make sure that we left some time for any questions that you guys might have. I believe the Q&A is open at the moment, and if you have any questions, please feel free to chuck them in the chat, and we can go through and answer any questions you might have.
So we have had a question come through, Higgsy. What if a customer has a contact center solution attached to their Skype for Business on-prem deployment? Excellent,
good question. So ultimately, if you've got a Skype for Business on-prem environment and you've got a contact center solution, one of the challenges is that currently, as of today, the calling APIs that are required for Microsoft Teams, those haven't been released to market. And so there's ultimately no contact center solution at the moment that gives you that full integration or like-for-like functionality that you have with Skype for Business on-prem today. So ultimately what that means is, it doesn't stop you from migrating the rest of the business. So you can go through and migrate from a telephony function from Skype for Business to Teams, but unfortunately those contact center users won't be able to migrate just yet. Now, there is some functionality. So, Teams and the products such as Enghouse Interactive's Contact Center for Teams, it does give you some functionality around what you can do from a contact center point of view. But you still have to run both the Teams client and the Enghouse client in parallel. So a call will be coming in, you'd answer it within Teams, and then you can control it from the Enghouse software. It doesn't give you that tight integration just yet. So my advice at the moment would be, assess whether or not the Enghouse product would be fit for purpose in its current state, or consider waiting a couple of months until those calling APIs do become available, and then ultimately migrating your contact center from that on-prem environment to the Teams contact center. Alternatively, we do find that some organizations are also looking to migrate from an on-prem contact center to another third-party contact center solution. And ultimately what that gives them is the resiliency around their telephony platform being separate from their contact center. So if for whatever reason let's say Microsoft has an outage and Teams goes down, the contact center doesn't necessarily go down either. Alternatively, if you've got a voice gateway that is controlling your telephony and it, for whatever reason, goes offline, your contact center doesn't go offline. And that means that it might be your primary source of revenue, that contact center remains functional, and vice versa as well. If the contact center goes down, it doesn't mean the telephony environment goes down either. So there might be an appetite for you guys to consider having Teams from a telephony platform separate to your contact center solution as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
We haven't had any more questions come through, Higgsy.
That's all right. Not a problem.
We might wrap it up there.
Not a problem. Thank you very much, guys. This, again, as Kayla mentioned, this is a part of a series of webinars. We do have another webinar on adoption coming up soon, as well as one on calling and meetings specifically. So understanding the nitty-gritties around calling and meetings and the key elements around adopting Teams as well will be coming up in future webinars, as well as there'll be more webinars being published in the future after these two upcoming.
And the recording and the slides from today's webinar will be available. They will be emailed to you after the webinar, so probably in a couple of hours.
Wonderful.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Kayla. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Have a great day.